Okay, we were going for a 3-part harmony, maybe 4-part harmony this morning. That was fun. I love when they ask me to sing with them. There are just a few songs that I am able to sing with them, so don't expect me to sing all the time. That's one of my favorites, Return Again by Shania Knoll. She's a Hebrew, and she sings the most beautiful songs, heart-touching. Speaking of harmony, before I get started, you know I always have something to say about my husband, and I can hardly miss an opportunity. He gives me so much material. Last week I said something to him about, now you know you shouldn't be doing 2 things at once. Poor Sean's going to go sit back there and give him courage as he's sitting through this. And he looked at me real funny, didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, well, you know how you drive, and if you were talking on the phone, you'd get excited and you just drive faster and faster and that sort of thing. So we were going to a gathering Friday afternoon, and both our vehicles were out by the road, of course, because we've had construction vehicles in our driveway and any place close and trailers. And so he left the house and he had both key fobs in his hand, and I'm thinking, oh no, I knew what was going to happen. I could have predicted it. He's not good with those. So I'm standing in the garage waiting for him. He's going to park his truck, and then he's going to pull the car around, of course, and get me. And so all of a sudden I hear my car horn blaring. Okay, well, he did exactly what I thought he would. He hit that button. He's got real big thumbs, and he can't hold this thing or have it in his pocket without hitting one of those buttons. So my car horn's going off just loud as it can go. Then in a moment I hear his truck horn start too. So it was about that moment I left the garage and went into the house to see how long this would go on. I was just glad we didn't have a third vehicle, but it was a funny thing. They weren't in sync, and they weren't in harmony either. One was Blair. When he came in to finally, he was laughing too. He said, well, you had to admit, one was blaring, then the other would blare, and then that one, and then the other. It took him probably a full minute to figure out which of those buttons to push. But anyway, like I said, he don't do 2 things at once. And we all get distracted by things like that, don't we? All these new technologies, and sometimes we just need to stay away from them. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about living from the inside out, and this is really part 2 of that. And then I'm going to have part 3 next week, and we're going to talk about mountaintop living. And what we're going to do is live from the second mountaintop. I had some slides this morning. All positive change begins in the mind, the heart, and the attitude. Outer change naturally follows the inner awakening. So you wake up from the inside out. It's a desire. You ask for it. Does anybody remember David Brooks? He's one of the panel members that had been on the one of the news stations for so long, sort of a conservative guy. He had what he calls a mountaintop experience. And I'm going to talk about that next week, the second mountain. Most of the time, he says, we aim too low. We walk in shoes too small. We spend our days shooting for a little burst of approval or some small victory. It's as if we're trying so hard to get a little closer to a sun lamp. If we get up and live a different way, we can bathe in real sunshine. And what he talks about throughout the two books that he's written so far is that what he was really looking for all those years while he was on television and a commentator was he was looking for his authentic self. And that's what we need to talk about today. It's not the little self that talks from the ego that needs to be a people pleaser. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that we learn early on to please people. And as I talked about 2 weeks ago, that's in our DNA. It's because from the beginning of human existence, we were tribal. It's how people were. If they didn't look out for the tribe, then they wouldn't exist. They had to look out for each other. They had to, the women would stay behind and during the days of hunters and gatherers, and they were the nurturers. They kept the children and the older people together. And the men would go out in groups, not alone, so that they could protect each other from the wild animals that were out there. So tribes and clans are natural. It's natural to us, but so is fear. And fear of not fitting in. And that's why a lot of people do a lot of things. It's from fear of not being admired, from not fitting in. Lao Tse said, care what other people think and you will forever be their prisoner. Always. You can never get away from it. So we understand our hardwiring and why we are the way we are, why we were tribal, why the brain says today, let's do whatever keeps everyone happy. And please don't upset the apple cart. So as children, we gathered all that information in. We learned from that. We learned that rule book. I told a couple of weeks ago about one woman that said that she was so deeply terrified of what other people thought of her that there was nothing she said or did that was authentic. She was afraid of upsetting somebody. She had low self-esteem, no self-confidence. She was a chronic people pleaser until she saw that. She said she couldn't remove herself from a conversation. She would be with someone, all they do is talk. They may even talk all day, and she didn't even have the courage to say, I'm needed over here. She couldn't even stop. She said she would laugh at jokes that on the inside she felt were deeply offensive or would offend another. But she couldn't speak up because she had no courage. She broke out of that one day and decided to be who she was meant to be. What happened was she had such massive headaches that she couldn't even care for her children. That's when she decided she needed to do something to change her life. One day, Jesus invited a man to follow him and become his disciple. But the man refused. He said he would follow Jesus later, but first he wanted to go bury his father. Jesus responded, "Follow me and let the dead bury their dead." That's from Matthew 8:22. What's the deeper meaning of that? What Jesus is saying is exactly what I was just talking about. Let those who want to wallow in their old thoughts stay there. Follow me. Follow a higher path. That's what each and every one of Jesus' parables tell us if we will really look at them. And I would ask each and every one of you to do that. When he came to the earth, he said, I've come to give you a new story. Love one another, even as I have loved you. But yet we tend to turn to those old rule books, don't we? We want some rules to live by. We want people to be punished. We want to see that. That's sort of the Old Testament thinking, I believe. But Jesus came to tell us a different way. And he's not the only one. But I just love to take each and every saying of his and think about it in today's terms. And I think really that was the intention. I think that he knew that he had come way too soon, and that there was hardly anybody, even his disciples, that could understand what he was saying. But he knew that 2,000 years later, there were those of us that would be able to take those words and bring them into our hearts where they're meant to be and live from that. Old thoughts, conditioning, fear. I read a story this week about red deer. Has anybody ever heard of large red deer in the old Czech Republic? Well, it turns out that back during the Cold War, there were deer that lived on one side of the fence and deer that lived on the other side of the fence. And there was barbed wire along the Czech border. The USSR put that up along with, it was electrified in certain places. And so the deer wouldn't even come close. And do you know that 33 years have passed since those fences have come down? And guess what? Guess what? Because of fear and conditioning, each deer stays on his or her side of the fence. Still, they won't cross. They won't mingle because of that imaginary fence. And you wonder, because their lifespan is generally about 15 years. So wouldn't you think they would have outgrown that by now? But conditioning goes deep, folks. You may think you've grown above it. That's what David Brooks calls first mountain thinking. We think we've become enlightened and we've moved above certain things. And you would think these deer have. That fence came down 33 years ago. But they're still not crossing that boundary. Isn't that amazing? I see a lot of planning going on today. Stunts that are supposed to be funny. They're not so funny. If you're using second mountain thinking and looking down from a humanitarian point of view. So even after that electrified fence came down, those deer still won't cross. A lot of our human beings won't either. We do need to understand, deeply understand at an inner knowing to be authentic, you must give up those old patterns and those old ways of thinking. And you do that every time you stand up and say, no, that doesn't work for me. No, thank you, I'm out of here. I try not to be rude about it. I do try not to be rude. I don't want to walk out on someone, but I do remember several years ago when I was in a church service, and the minister was a gentle and wonderful man, and I loved him dearly. But he started trying to use the Bible to say why we should go to war. And I looked up at him and I prayed and I sent him some love, but then I knew that I could not stay in that room and listen to that. It felt rude, and it probably was, to get up and leave, but I couldn't be there. That was a consciousness that did not work for me. And that's a decision, that's a personal decision that each one of us has to make. Each and every one of us has to make a personal decision sometimes. Can I go along with this? And we can't. Sometimes we're with family, and they're continuing some old familiar way of handling a situation. Maybe they're going to clan up against somebody else. They're going to agree with their brother, even they know their brother's wrong, but they're going to agree with him because, well, that's your brother, right? I quit doing that a long time ago. And it brought on some difficult conversations, I have to tell you. And trying, as I said, trying to be gentle and loving and kind. It's just saying, that's not who I am. That's not who I intend to be. And I will not participate in that. Even if I have to walk home, and I've done that, and it might be a few miles, and I've done that. I will not participate in that. And I think that's what we're all called to do, is to stand up. Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, I know a seaworthy vessel when I see one. And in times like this, we're tempted to wave our arms, flail, scream, yell. But what we're called to do, if we've had a second mountain experience and we know who we are, and we know who sent us, and we know who we stand for, we're supposed to stand up and show our soul. All souls on deck. Count me in. Jesus said that we are to be the light. There are many people that have come to this earth to be a light, and some of them didn't stay that long. You remember that was his nickname for Israel. I know Joan knows who I'm talking about, the Hawaiian man who, his favorite song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Does everybody remember now who I'm talking about? Israel. He was the beloved gentle giant of a Hawaiian singer who became famous for his ukulele-accompanied version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. He sang it in his own style. He weighed over 700 pounds. But he was a big angel, a Buddha of a man. You could see it in everything he did, everything he said. And in his songs, if you'll listen to the lyrics, he made most of them up. He did it his way. I think somebody back in the 50s sang a song. Maybe it was Frank Sinatra or somebody. I'll do it my way. Remember that song. And I think to be authentic and true is just what he did. He died and died about 1997, I believe. He'd had multiple hospitalizations because of his health. He'd never been able to do anything about his weight. He'd been that way all of his life. And most people who loved him didn't care, didn't judge him. They only listened to that beautiful voice. And I hope you'll look it up and listen to him. Maybe on your way home, if you can do two things at once. Maybe you should get that going before you start your car and listen to it. It's a beauty of a song. It's wonderful. It's God's harmony. It's having reached heaven while you're still here on earth and knowing it. He had an image like a rock star. He was a rock star. His image lasts on and on and on. So finally, I'm just going to tell you for a moment how you can find your authentic self, and that is, what are you passionate about? What do you find that you just love? And you say, oh, I love this. I absolutely love this. I know I've told you that when Shelby was about 9 or 10 years old, she was at our house, and I had a book on astrology, and I don't have a clue where it came from. I don't know much about astrology. I know I'm a Libra, and I certainly fit that. But she took it and held it in her hands and to her chest, and she said, oh, I have found something I love. And she just loved it and took it home and studied it. And I don't know if she's ever looked at it again, but at that time she loved it. And I want to tell you another way you can find what true passion is, and that is just turn on the TV and turn it on the Weather Channel. And those guys have something to be passionate about right now. I am telling you, if you want to see somebody stand up and show their soul, they are so excited. They don't have just one hurricane to talk about. They have two. And they have something else out there in the Caribbean that's brewing too. And so they're just, you talk about somebody in his element. I am telling you what, it'll just bring a smile to your face as you observe them in their element. That's passion, folks. You want to see zeal and enthusiasm that Charles Fillmore talked about? Those were some of the principles that he talked about that come innately to us, zeal and enthusiasm. So you have an example right in front of you of what that looks like. I was laughing at them yesterday. I told Dan, I said, wow, watch them. Don't they have something to talk about these days? Anyway, that's how you're going to know. You're going to feel a passion for it. You're going to feel a passion for sharing your light your talent, your zeal, your enthusiasm. Maybe it's with your art, Tina. There are so many different ways that we share. The Buddha said, make of yourself a light. And like Jesus, he knew that he was light. And when he looked out into the crowd, all he saw was light. And it didn't have to be a crowd of enlightened people. Sometimes it was people that didn't even know that the light was within them. But it was there. It was there all along. So I would just encourage you this morning to accept the gifts that you've been given. Find those authentic ones and share them. Your authentic gift may be a smile. It may be uplifting another without even knowing it. It may be like Roger when he was with his dear Bella those last few months of her life. And although he wanted to get up and move around, he sat on the bench with her and talked to her. We all have gifts. We all have love to share. We have light. And I would encourage you to find the way to allow God's light to shine through you. Thank you for your time.